Hello? Hello, St. Paul's Church? Hey, are you home? I could really use the bathroom. Can you let me in? Believe it or not, I heard this kind of knock a lot throughout my 20s. Nearly every day for about 5 years, roughly, I would inevitably hear the knock. And it always seemed to come at the most inconvenient time, like whenever I was trying to leave my house, or trying to sleep, or when I was in the bathroom. Now, there was a reason why people were knocking at my door at incredibly inconvenient times. And it wasn't happenstance or because I had a sign on my door that said, "Please knock at the most inconvenient time possible." The knock was a significant part of my life because I worked with the homeless community of Dallas, Texas. I lived in a house called the Bonhoeffer House, which was a Christian community that journeyed alongside the homeless neighbors in the neighborhood it resided in. And our work with this community was a bit unique, to say the least. We weren't a shelter. We didn't provide physical resources or financial help. Our work was to help the homeless community form meaningful relationships and friendships with housed people. We helped increase their social capital, which meant sometimes letting someone into our house to use our restroom because they were our friend, and friends let other friends use their bathroom whenever they need it. Now, building relationships with the unhoused was not exactly an easy job, but it was meaningful, and it felt like what we did really mattered. It also involved some of the most completely absurd situations I ever experienced in my life. You just never knew what was going to happen or to be said when you heard the knock on the door. Some of my personal favorite knocks at the door included, and I'm going to knock each time, "Hey, I got your mail for you. Oh, by the way, there's only $5 left on that Subway gift card from your aunt." Yeah. "You aren't missing your grill, are you?" "Ooh, yeah. I might have stolen your grill when I was drunk last night. Sorry about that." And this is my personal favorite. "Hey, yeah, Kevin's pants caught on fire. Again." Now, I know these situations are a bit humorous, and I think they're humorous because they seem absurd, especially to those of us who are housed. And I think the reason why these situations seem absurd to those of us who are housed is because we don't have to deal with the kind of absurd circumstances that someone who is unhoused has to deal with on a daily basis. We don't have to deal with a reality where we have to go up to someone else's door and ask to use their bathroom. We don't know what it's like to be so desperate that we're willing to bend our morals, compromise our integrity, and even lie just to survive and get what we need. We who are housed cannot understand the psychological implications and the emotional toll it takes on someone to live in survival mode for weeks, months, and even years at a time. When we hear stories from the homeless community that seem absurd, unrealistic, or even filled with lies, we fail to understand that their reality is very different from ours. They don't play by the same rules that house people play by. They don't care about our rules because they're following the rules of desperation and survival. They're only concerned about what you have to do to stay alive. I learned about this reality when I would go out and sleep on the streets with our homeless neighbors that we knew in our community. I was trying to better understand their experience and who they were. And I remember the very first night I went out with some of the guys. We were getting ready to leave the house, and one of the guys said, "Hold on 1 second." And he goes around the corner and grabs 2 rocks about the size that would fit in my hand. And he says, hands them to me and says, "Put these in your pocket." And I was kind of confused. I didn't really understand, and I said, "Well, what are these for? Why are you giving me rocks?" And he looked at me kind of like I was an idiot, and then said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world, "Those are in case someone tries to steal our stuff or attacks us. You throw them at people if they get too close to you." That was shocking. That was incredibly shocking. I had never been in a situation where I had to worry about my stuff being stolen or being attacked while I slept. In theory, up to that point, I had always been I would say, I'm a pacifist. I don't want to hurt anyone else. But suddenly I was thrust into this stark and raw reality where I might have to throw a rock at someone to defend myself. And I didn't know how I would react in that kind of situation. And I recognized that this was just a taste. I wasn't stuck in this endless state of concern and fear and anxiety like my friends who lived on the streets were. I always knew my feelings of desperation would be temporary. If it was ever too much, I could go back to the safety of my home. I never had to worry indefinitely with no clear sight in the end, like the men I was with on those nights. Now, desperation and homelessness aren't exactly the funnest things to talk about during the holidays, right? It's an unsettling thing to think about the fact that there will be people outside in the cold who are desperate while we are in our homes opening presents. It's not the picture-perfect Christmas time that many of us have in our heads. And I'm sure most of us would rather reflect on the joys and comforts of our home rather than the harsh realities of those without a home. But gaining a better understanding of those who are most desperate during the holidays can actually help us understand the story of Advent better. We don't often talk about the circumstances Jesus was born into when we read the stories leading up to his birth. And I think it can be helpful for us to remember that Jesus was born into a circumstance of desperation. In 63 BC, Palestine, the lands Jesus was born into, fell into the hands of the Roman Empire. In the years leading up to Jesus' birth, the Jewish people who resided in that land had their way of life and livelihood squeezed out of them. Their land and holy places were desecrated to make way for temples in honor of Emperor Augustus. Taxes of all kinds took away their financial resources. Their rights were slowly diminished and eroded almost completely away because of their status as an ethnic and religious minority in the land. The Jewish people of the time experienced their home being taken away from them and destroyed right in front of their eyes. And there was nothing they could do about it. These were the circumstances of desperation Jesus was born into. He was not a person of privilege or power. He was not a Roman citizen with rights. He was born into a poor Jewish family who didn't initially have a home in this story. And he was part of a desperate community trying to hold on to what was left of their home. And just like my homeless friends' life on the streets, there was no end in sight to their desperate circumstances. There was little to no hope of salvation. that their home would be somehow restored to them. Let that sink in. There was no end in sight and no pathway forward. Our scripture text today picks up at this pivotal moment in the story, a juncture point where this community of people are at their deepest and darkest moment. That moment where you're teetering on the edge of apathy, where it whispers in your ear saying, "Give up. There's nothing left to hope for." The Gospel of Mark begins at the precipice of this life-altering moment and infuses something so necessary, so essential, so powerful that it changes the course of this story. Mark announces at a moment of needed grace to desperate people, there's good news. God is up to something. Salvation from these oppressive circumstances is not only possible, but it's on its way right now. Listen for a voice crying out in the wilderness that says, prepare the way of the Lord. Now imagine how powerful and necessary this moment is for the one who is desperate, who has their back against the wall. Imagine how this proclamation of good news could give them the courage needed to face this challenge, to walk through the deepest dark they are facing in their life. The Gospel of Mark's Advent story gives us the image of an active God who intercedes with grace-filled good news when God's people need it the most. But this doesn't mean that God does all the work for us. We still have to prepare the way. We still have to do the work of John the Baptist, who prepares his people and community for the salvific work of Christ. John creates this space for his people by the Jordan River to help them walk through their darkest moments together. So no one is alone in their desperation. I think there's many ways we can help prepare the way to salvation for those who are most desperate around the holidays. We as a church can always practice radical hospitality and create a feeling of home for anyone who enters our space. We can take it a step further and help the Sending to Serve team with the Love Tree Project, which provides necessary and needed items to the Willis Dady shelter, which is just a couple streets over from us. We could go even further and give a financial donation directly to Willis Dady and even volunteer at the shelter and help the staff with a project over the course of Advent and Christmas. They probably really need the help right now. And those are all really good and worthwhile things, and we as a church should do all of those things. But there's something I really want us all to do over this Advent and Christmas season. It's something that might seem a bit small, but in my mind it's maybe even more important and harder than those things that I just named. Really listen to this. I want you to be prepared for the reality that at some point during the holiday season, you're going to encounter someone who is desperate. They might be someone experiencing homelessness. They might be standing with a sign at Walmart saying their family is hungry and they could use money. They might even be someone who's serving you food or a cashier who's checking you out at the register. I want you to be prepared for the reality that there will be someone who is desperate, and I want you to be awake enough to acknowledge that person's desperation without looking the other way. I want you to sit with that unsettling tension that there is someone who is right in front of you who is truly desperate. And I want you to honor our call as Christians to not ignore that desperation. And then within reason, and please don't ever do anything to put yourself in danger, but within reason, if you feel so compelled and convicted, create some space like John the Baptist to be with that person. Go up to them, preferably with someone else. Again, don't do anything dangerous, but go up with someone else and ask them their name. Give them that dignity of knowing their name. They deserve that. They deserve knowing that someone knows their name and is willing to listen to their story. Don't let them slip away into obscurity. Let them be a real, breathing human being with a name. I believe if we all took the time to learn the name of someone who is desperate, we would certainly have less homelessness in the world. And I believe this kind of somewhat wild claim because when we know someone's name, we can no longer ignore them. There's someone we know. They have a name and we can't forget them. Kevin, Mike, Samantha, Van, Cole, David, Pam, Shannon, Paul, Ray, Norman, James, Jason, and Michael. These are some of the names I journeyed with when I was in Dallas. And I pray that you also may hold the names of those you meet who are desperate close to your heart during this Advent season. Amen.